Good morning. Thank you all so much for coming. David, thank you for that introduction. My name is Aaron Dorfman, and I have the privilege of serving as the Executive Director of the National Committee for Responsive Philanthropy. The problems facing our nation and the world are getting worse every day, and philanthropy has an opportunity and an obligation to be part of the solution. While there are clearly many outstanding foundations scattered throughout the country, I believe many people will be shocked, angered, and disappointed by much of what we have found in our research about current philanthropic practice. Foundations can do better, and for the sake of our world and its people, they need to do better. And so this morning, NCRP is proud to be releasing our criteria for philanthropy at its best. And by the time we're finished today, you'll know just a little bit about each criterion, why it matters, and what we're challenging America's grant makers to do. For the past 15 months, NCRP has been developing these criteria. We studied more than 3 decades of relevant research about the sector, and we analyzed current practices. And after we rigorously debated what matters most in philanthropy, our board adopted the criteria and the benchmarks, and then NCRP staff began putting together this fantastic book. And I just want to acknowledge Nikki Jagpal, who's here in the front row, our Research and Policy Director, who's the primary author of the document. So. Our criteria provide a roadmap for how foundations and other institutional grant makers can make the greatest possible impact with their limited dollars. So our first criterion is about promoting the American values. Can you get the slide, Kevin? Thank you. About promoting the American values of democracy and inclusion. We are seeking a renewed commitment on the part of our nation's grant makers to help our most underserved neighbors. Our analysis shows that only $1 out of every $3 granted by American foundations goes towards supporting economically or socially disadvantaged populations. This is, frankly, appalling, and it must improve if foundations are going to be relevant to addressing the most important problems facing our nation. We also found, disappointingly, that 93% of foundations are not supporting advocacy, community organizing, or civic engagement at any significant level. Remember, it was advocacy, an activity that nurtures the fabric of our democracy, that led to civil rights, women's rights, the minimum wage, and other landmark changes in our society. So watching our nation's grant makers trying desperately to improve health or education outcomes without providing funding for advocacy is like watching them head into battle with one hand tied behind their backs. The good news is that we identified 108 foundations, leaders of the field, that already devote 50% or more of their grant dollars for marginalized communities. And we also found 56 grant makers that show a substantial commitment to supporting citizen and nonprofit advocacy. This shows that the benchmarks we have set are achievable and that there are some exemplary grant makers who are setting a positive example for others to follow. Our second criterion is about creating true partnerships between foundations and nonprofits. Partnerships where grant makers invest in building strong, vibrant, and healthy organizations that are equipped to most effectively serve America's families and communities. And so in this criterion, we're calling on our nation's grant makers to provide at least half of their grant dollars as unrestricted general operating support and at least half of their grant dollars as multi-year grants. And we're also challenging grant makers to stop burying their nonprofit partners under mountains of paperwork. Our research, somebody knows what I'm talking about back there. Our research found well over 100 field leaders that already meet or exceed these benchmarks, which was definitely encouraging, and there are probably many more that we couldn't get the data on. But we were alarmed to find that general operating support has actually been on the decline in recent years, despite clear evidence of its benefits. This has got to change if America's civic sector is going to be a powerful part of the solution to the many problems we're facing right now. Our third criterion calls on our nation's grant makers to serve as ethical stewards of the partially public dollars with which they have been entrusted. I say partially public dollars because of the generous tax subsidies that donors and foundations receive, which means that taxpayers are actually partners with foundations in pursuing the public good. Now, let me be clear, many, perhaps even most foundations do operate ethically, but far too many individuals, more than just a few bad apples, abuse their foundations for personal gain, and that's just not right. Our criteria establish benchmarks that will help curb these terrible abuses of the public trust. We recommend that foundation boards have at least 5 people and include a diversity of perspectives. And we also call for foundations to maintain policies that promote ethical behavior and to share information freely and openly with the public. These are simple but important steps that grant makers can take to help reduce the potential for abuse. Our fourth criterion is about making sure that foundations are maximizing the power of their financial assets. No one wants to see tax-exempt charitable dollars being warehoused. We all want to see foundation dollars being put to use in pursuit of the public good. And so we're calling on America's foundations to give out significantly more dollars in grants. We know that foundation assets have declined dramatically in recent months. But I know you would agree with me that the primary way grant makers can make a difference on the most pressing issues facing the nation and the world is by making grants to powerful and effective community partners. Reducing grants in this time of crisis, as more than a few foundations have already done, is a recipe for irrelevance, and it doesn't serve foundations or the sector or the public in the long run. We also recommend in this criterion mission investing as a way for foundations to put their portfolios to work in pursuit of the public good. And many foundations have successfully leveraged their assets to improve corporate environmental practices, to just give one example. So our criteria for philanthropy at its best can help foundations and other institutional grant makers be more responsive, more relevant, and more impactful. Now, some have suggested that we use the criteria as a ranking system for foundations, but that's not what we're doing. And we're not using the criteria as a call for increased government regulation of the sector either. Our criteria instead offer a useful tool for meaningful self-regulation, an opportunity for the leaders of our nation's grant-making institutions to examine their own practices and figure out what they want to change. Now, in a moment, we're going to hear some stories from 3 NCRP board members. Dave Beckwith, Executive Director of the Need More Fund, which is a relatively modest-sized family foundation based in Ohio. Judy Hatcher, Executive Director of the Environmental Support Center, a grant-making public charity that assists grassroots environmental groups around the country. And Gara LaMarche, President and CEO of Atlantic Philanthropies, one of the largest grant makers in the world. But first, I think we're going to have a few words from Congressman Xavier Becerra, who has been able to join us this morning. So, Congressman Becerra, welcome.